so they were very well prepared for this. The spring of 1857 had a long, sugary time. Lots of cold nights and warm days, and they collected a lot of sap. They cut a lot of wood to keep the fires burning. They weren't interested in maple syrup. They had to take it one step further and make maple sugar. And so once they had the maple sugar, they went down to Maple Rapids and did some trading. But they were not able to state what they wanted. They only took what he gave them because he took most of their maple sugar, and it was not an even trade by any means. The store people were still cheating then. Dr. John Cheeseman had come into Hamilton Township over in the east end or side of the county. He brought enough food for a year. That was only wise. And so he was all set, and his family was all set. But when he looked at his neighbors, they had nothing. What do? Well, you do what you really have to do. You share, and pretty soon the Cheeseman cupboard was also bare. But he knew people in Chicago. He had somebody there with money, and so he wrote to them, and they sent $50 or $100. And he knew then he could buy flour. So he talked with one of the neighbors who had oxen that could still move, and he said, will you go down to Maple Rapids and get the neighborhood here a load of flour? Here's the money. So the man started out, but it was winter, and there was a lot of ice and ponds in the woods, and before long the oxen, breaking through the ice, were damaging their legs. He came back and said, I can't do it, because before long these oxen won't even be able to walk. Well, Cheeseman wondered what to do now. He had the money, but he didn't have any access to flour. So he heard that the man who lived 6 miles away had some flour. He said, well, I bet maybe he'd sell me some. So he headed off through the woods, walking on the ice, and came to the man and said, could I buy some flour? And the man said, I won't sell you flour, but since you're going to be getting flour, I'll give you this much, and when you get yours, give me that much back, which was fair. So he took the bag of flour, put it on his shoulder, and headed back. With the added weight, he broke through the ice with every step. 6 miles. I liken that to trying to climb a sand dune, which you probably all have tried at some point. It was exhausting, but he brought the bag of flour home. So his family and neighbors, at least for a while, had some flour. People, by the summer of 1857, about planting time in the spring and summer, were pretty much out of everything, running low on provisions. They didn't have money. They just had not produced enough food. Their clothing was threadbare. Conditions were horrible. But help was on the way. Word of the plight of the people here in Gratiot County had gone to the southern part of the state, to the metropolitan areas, and I suppose some people down there went ho-hum about it because it didn't really affect them, but there was a compassionate man, a Reverend Hickey, who read about it in the newspaper and wondered what is actually going on up in Gratiot County. So he shipped his horse by rail up to St. John's, which was the end of the railroad, and he, of course, rode along on the railroad and then mounted the horse and headed up across Clinton County toward Gratiot, asking people, what's going on up there? Well, he got some mixed reports. Some people said, oh, it's a bunch of wahoos up there. They're incompetent and they're only getting what they deserve. Others said things are really tough up there. Those people really need help. Once he got into Gratiot County and started talking to people, he also got mixed reports. A boy said that he'd been living on rutabagas and salt his family had for meal after meal after meal, day after day after day. Somebody else said it was pancakes for their family. At least they had something to eat, but there wasn't much variety and it wasn't really plentiful. A lady said, oh, those people, a lot of them are just lazy. And he said, well, how are you doing? She said, well, our cow died, but we had credit and we bought another one, so we'll make it through. There was a degree of pride among some of the people. They didn't want to admit that they had kind of lost out. You know, it made them look bad in somebody's eyes. And so when Reverend Hickey reached St. Louis, at the time called Pine River, he stayed with the Hastings family, whose cabin was just up to the light and half a block west on the north side. And he talked to them, and Sidney Hastings was a man of great compassion. He was the county surveyor, fairly young man, and built the third log cabin here in the town. And he said, the things are very, very bad. And Reverend Hickey had finally figured that out. There wasn't much doubt about it. People were in bad shape. He said, when I get back to Detroit, I think I can noise this around and people will rise to this occasion and make contributions. And I will send you some money. And Sidney Hastings said, don't send money, send food. And so it was arranged. When Hickey got back, he managed to do all of this, and the food was sent to St. John's and to Saginaw. And there, somebody took charge of it and kept it, and it was up to the people in the county to send men out to get the food and fetch it home. Well, here in St. Louis, this is really amazing. Here in St. Louis, the storekeeper, whose store was about a block and a half up on Main Street, up by the school, the storekeeper, Jacob Wolden, a German immigrant, had decided that he would stock his store by going down the river system to Saginaw. And to do that, he needed transportation, and so he went up in what's now the yard of the castle, and he cut the largest pine tree in Gratiot County. It was 7 feet through, and somehow managed to cut a chunk of that and make it into a gigantic dugout canoe. It was painted red. I don't even know how he carved it, made it, or how he ever got it into the river, but anyway, he managed to do that. It was painted red and named for his daughter, Susan. This canoe was the famous Red Susan that made trips to Saginaw and back. You don't paddle a canoe like this. You have to have a crew. And so Sidney Hastings said, there's food down in Saginaw. Mr. Wilden, can we borrow your canoe? And Mr. Wilden said, yeah, you can. And so with the crew, they went down the rivers. It took 2 days to just drift down the Pine, the Chippewa, the Tittabawassee, and the Saginaw to get to Saginaw City and East Saginaw. There they hooked up with the man that had taken possession of their food and protected it for them. They loaded the Red Susan with food and started back. To come back with any conveyance loaded on the rivers, especially the Saginaw and the Tittabawassee, which are sizable rivers, you pole by pushing into the river bottom. And so they did that until they got into the Pine, and in the Pine there were a lot of obstacles. So they had to get out, the men got out and fastened ropes on the Red Susan and towed the Red Susan by walking in the river or on a path that had been opened on the riverbank by the traffic of Indians and now white men. It was sort of like the mules on the towpath in the Erie Canal. That was basically what they were doing, and they were towing this massive canoe. The Red Susan, loaded, could float 6,000 pounds. That's 3 tons. And so it was loaded. And so later, Sidney Hastings said, it takes an amazingly tough men to do something like they did. Unbelievable. They walked and pulled and got the Red Susan over rocks and riffles and sandbars and past fallen trees. And in the evening they would stop, tether the Red Susan to a tree and have a little bite to eat, wrap up in their blanket, and fall on the bank like dead men. They were so exhausted. And in the morning, have a little breakfast and start over again. So it took them 5 days to come from Saginaw to St. Louis.